Guest for the program now is Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist from Bristol, and Sayed Mohsen Abbas, journalist and political commentator, joining us out of London. Gentlemen, welcome both of you to the program here. Good to have both of you on. I guess, Tony, we'll start with you. Your thoughts on how this next generation in America is showing growing opposition to the Israeli regime, Tony, and not just what it is doing today in Gaza, but basically what it stands for.
Well, let me give you a picture of what's been going on here in Bristol, because I mean, I'm not totally clear about exactly what's happening in the US, but certainly here in Bristol, we've got a couple of institutions. We're very lucky to have something called a Palestine museum here in Bristol. Very few cities in the UK have got it, but it's right in the city centre, and it's got the whole, it's open most days of the week, particularly weekends, and it's got a whole history of the British involvement in Palestine. And there are many items there people can get to grips with the history and understand what's going on. We're a very anti-racist city, so obviously it was a city which was very active in the anti-apartheid campaigns in South Africa, and has been equally so with enormous marches here on the streets in support of Palestine. But we've also got a university. Bristol University is one of the biggest universities in the country, and what we've seen there is preemptive strikes by the Israel lobby against the university to actually get rid of academics there. But the students have been occupying buildings here in Bristol, several different occupations where they go in for a few days to take over parts of the university. And the reason they're doing this is because they can see that the mass media and the politicians, the two main elite institutions, are simply supporting the genocide. And whilst they continue to do that, civil society is beginning to kick back against this government and particularly against the press. There's been graffiti, for example. We've got murals across the city which are portraying the Palestinian struggle. And so this has become a cause célèbre for cities like Bristol, which is involved for many years in this slave trade and has a very conscious group of young people and students. They are 100% behind the Palestinians.
Thank you, Tony. Sayed, welcome to the program. Now, Sayed, you very well know many of these students are risking quite a bit by getting out and getting themselves involved with these protests. Some of them are suffering their first arrest as a young man or woman. Many of them are risking their admission status. Even some faculty members are joining in, possibly losing their tenure at these universities. Some of these students are getting branded, you very well know, with certain kind of hate charges or whatnot, anti-Semitic charges, risking scholarships and stipends. Yet here they are being part of this movement. And this cannot be good, can it, for the Israeli regime, what these young Americans are willing to risk to get their voices heard?
Well, you see, the Zionist and Israeli Hasbara, their control of the American political system, their control of the media, these are all well-known facts by those of us who are aware of what Zionism is and how powerful it is around the world, and how its networks have really been able to overrun so many, especially the Western institutions, let alone talking about the East as well, which are often subsidiaries of Anglo-Zionist imperialism anyway. So what they've done with this system is they kept people ignorant. Most Americans didn't know anything about Zionism. They probably wouldn't even have known what Zionism actually even means, the definition of it. And they wouldn't have known really what Israel was up to inside their own territories also. So there's a lot of ignorance. But of course, single-handedly, Netanyahu and his government and Joe Biden and his callous support for this genocide has woken so many people up. I mean, to the point where here in Britain and over there, what you're getting is statistics. I mean, Ipsos and the Brookings Institute have given statistics, and then there are the YouGov statistics here in Britain. All of them reflect the same thing, that basically the Western public, the British public, the American public, are now around 66 to 70% against Israel in one shape or form. They are certainly not for continuing the war against the Gazans. They certainly aren't in support of the genocide. They certainly want ceasefire. They certainly now have a low opinion of Israel itself as an entity which seems extraordinarily fascist and violent as far as they're concerned. So this is a huge sea change. This is massive, that the public opinion has gone against the establishment. And now what we're finding is the establishment is at loggerheads with that majority of the public. So they've got to consider their votes. There are elections coming up in America and Britain. How do they play that? They're obviously going to have tactics to try and obfuscate some of the clear violations, because let's make no mistake, the Americans and the British are part and parcel of the genocide. They are absolutely integral to the genocide, to the Israelis being able to carry out their genocide. And increasingly, people are beginning to find that out. Now, whether this has shades of Vietnam, you remember when people did wake up about Vietnam, it was almost impossible for the Americans then to continue. Are these university protests out there at the beginnings of this? Are the protests here in London, which have got the biggest turnouts I've ever seen in my living memory? Is this the beginning of a real sea change of civil action, which is going to go against the Christian Zionists, the AIPAC Jewish lobbies, the Israel lobby here in Britain? I think so. I think that we're seeing a really genuine change. And Jewish youth are turning on in America, certainly, against the IPAC narratives, against the Zionist narratives there in America. So you're finding that even Jewish youth are no longer finding Israel, its actions palatable, and they don't really want to be associated with. There's a huge problem for them.
That's a really good point, Tony, and I'm going to put that to you. This whole the evolution of awareness with this new generation when it comes to Israel. Said made a really good point. I mean, not too long ago, when they're very oblivious to the whole Palestine-Israel struggle for over the years. I mean, maybe a young man or woman in America might think, oh, why is everyone so critical in that region when these poor sons and daughters of Holocaust survivors, everyone's so critical of them. They just want a safe little place to flourish and be their own people, knowing very little about what they've done to the indigenous people there to get that little piece of land to try to flourish. Your thoughts on how the narrative has changed over the last 200 days dramatically?
Well, it is dramatic. And, the biggest change, I think, has been amongst the Jewish population, particularly Jewish academics. Many of them have been speaking out. I mean, I've interviewed them on my own program here. This has been a large part of the protests in the United States as well, with Jewish academics protesting with the students. And also, of course, as soon as they speak out, the universities cancelling their passes to get in and out of the university. This is almost a gift, a propaganda gift to the student protesters, who can see not only with the Jewish students, but with Jewish academics also calling out this genocide. There is a wave, I think, Mohsin's absolutely right, going across civil society, particularly in Britain and the United States, who have been two such big supporters of the Israeli genocide. They have, I think, seen the biggest impact on them. Now, we've got a prime minister here in Britain, rather like Joe Biden, who looks to be on the way out. Rishi Sunak is doing everything wrong. All of his policies seem to be designed to make him look stupid and to actually help the B team, that is Keir Starmer, to get in the general election coming up here in Britain. But the trouble is, the Starmer party is also part of the Israel lobby itself. The Labour Friends of Israel are extremely strong, even in our city. Most of the MPs that represent Bristol in Westminster are part of this Israel lobby, but they are going to have all sorts of problems getting themselves elected in the general election. We'll probably see new parties like the Green Party come in because they're basically, by pinning their rosette on this genocide, they are almost certainly going to lose at coming general elections. So this is having enormous effects on a political movement which is stuck in the mud, that's finding the water being washed away from underneath it, the soil being washed away from it, is starting to crumble like sand being washed away, and new political forces coming, like, for example, the not necessarily massive party, but the ideas of people like George Galloway have enormous traction here in Britain, particularly amongst the former Labour Party. So Moisin's absolutely right. We're seeing an enormous change, and I think what we'll see at the universities, we'll see even more in coming months, unless the Israeli people can actually get their Israeli Defense Force and Netanyahu and his government. I see there's enormous protests again today against Ben Gvir, particularly getting a protest against him. Right as soon as he comes out of a building, he comes into the streets. He's got people screaming at him. Let's do a deal. Let's swap the Palestinian prisoners for Israeli hostages. They want their families back, and so this is having an enormous effect on, particularly on the the transatlantic, the Anglo-Zionist empire, the heart of that empire in Britain and the United States.
Thanks, Tony. And Said, final thoughts with you. How are we to digest the fact that we've seen hundreds upon hundreds, if not thousands, of protests worldwide? We see it with these young men and women in America on these campuses, and to Tony's point, even out the UK and many other European countries, if not worldwide nations. But to get to my point, on Joe Biden, the U.S. president's desk right now, is this piece of legislation that just went, this aid package. Billions upon billions is about to get inked and handed over to the Israelis in additional aid. Do we take this as a huge loss, or should we go back to the change you were saying and say that there might be losses along the way, but there are wins as well?
Well, you see, the impact is enormous in other ways as well. You see, the morality of society here itself, of course, people can relate to the oppressed. They can relate to oppression. There's different kinds of oppression that the establishment does. Here in the West, we had austerity oppression. We've had oppression of rich versus poor. We've had all sorts of lies told around the COVID issues and the vaccines. Increasingly, all of these things, along with what we're seeing with the forever wars in Gaza and the genocide and Ukraine, of course, let's not forget that. What we're seeing is that people just don't trust politicians. They didn't before, but they certainly aren't trusting them very much now. It's not enhanced the support for the political system. And the more you see, excuse me, the more you see in New York, for instance, in Columbia University, you see the attack on students by the establishment and the police and the national troops or the guards or wherever they are. The greater you see the difference between ordinary people and the idea of democracy and freedom, and you see these authoritarian, oligarchical totalitarianisms disguised as democracy. So I think democracy is going to be questioned in terms of the Western public, thinking, are we really being ruled by people who represent us, or are they representing Israel and foreign people's interests and the interests of the oligarchs and the billionaires? This is the underlying problem, I think, even for Western governments, that the more you do this, the more you support Israel and the corporates who support Israel and are embedded in Western governments. I mean, I'll give you an example. At Columbia University, the guy who funds Columbia University to the max, I've forgotten his name off the record, but he's threatened today to pull out his funding. In fact, I think he's done it, and Columbia University is talking about potentially doing online classes only. So you see, this embedded nature of Zionism comes in terms of money and finance, not just government money, but corporate finance as well. So that will open up a whole new can of worms. Here in the City of London, we have an entire 1 mile squared, a mile which is basically out of the control of the British government. Yet it resides here under the Lord Mayor, completely with its own police, with its own laws. It's not controlled by even the British government in that sense. You have that with Wall Street. So I think that the danger for the American and the British oligarchies is that they're going to get exposed by tying themselves so closely to such a genocide. Actually, the whole can of worms is potentially going to be opening up very, very soon.
All right, gentlemen, thank you both for joining us on the program. Stay safe to both of you. Always a pleasure to check in with you, the two of you. Said Mohsen Abbas there, joining us there from London, and Tony Gosling joining us out of Bristol. And viewers, this brings us to the conclusion of this segment of your Press TV News Review program. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye for now.